month of Nisan that we just entered yesterday. We just finished the month of Adar, and now we come to everyone's favorite month of Nisan, the month of miracles, and the month of cleaning. So, yeah, we take it a little far with the spring cleaning. It's not,
And
not
if I get this
necessarily,
place clean, it
not
would be
always Pesach connected, but there's a famous expression that dust is not chametz, and children are not the Paschal lamb. They're not like we brought a carbon Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, and children aren't the Pesach sacrifice. So that's what the men always said. The women always had a slightly different opinion about Pesach, which Pesach should be, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, so
what do the women?
Somehow they feel like that the house should be clean more. That's their feelings. I don't know. Nothing's expected. No, we don't expect anything. No, it's just basically, it's saying that sometimes people go overboard with that stuff, where dusting your bookshelves is not making it more kosher for Passover at some point. That's just.
I doubt if I'm going to get to that.
I'm saying that's just making your house clean at some point, where many people take Pesach to the extreme, where you're cleaning your house for chametz, so they clean their house of everything. You're throwing out every old magazine, every old book. It's not necessarily connected with Pesach as much as it just became into spring cleaning. Yeah, it's great. Okay, so there are those people that think that when we have a tendency in life to do something right, do something wrong, that's our tendency, and we can't change it, and that's who we are. That's the way we're always going to be. For example, let's say someone didn't grow up observing all the mitzvot, didn't grow up observing Shabbat. They feel like, okay, it's not my tendency to do, and that's it. I'm done. I'm never going to do it. So, is this right or wrong? Pretty simple answer, right?
Wrong.
I think it's wrong. We could change our tendency. So, how do we? Where do we find that Torah tells us this and tells us how to do this? Yeah. So, but where does Torah tell us how to accomplish this? How to conquer our nature? Yeah. So, well, yeah. And it tells us, the rest of the course that we're going to read. So this past Shabbat, we read a special part of the Torah in honor of Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's called Parshat HaChodesh. If you were in Shul this past Shabbos, we had 2 Torahs. And it was the last of the 4 special Parshat that we read. This one is called HaChodesh. It talks about how we bless the new month. Right? There's a Rosh Chodesh, there's a first of the month every single month. But there's something specifically special about Rosh Chodesh Nisan, about the first day of Nisan, again, which was yesterday. That's in text 1a.
Are there other Rosh Chodeshes?
Every month has a Rosh Chodesh.
Oh, yeah.
Rosh Chodesh means the beginning of the month. Rosh Chodesh.
Yeah, and it's kind of in the middle of it. It's the new moon, right?
So it's the middle of the. There's no
middle
moon.
Of the month.
Yeah, there's basically no moon at that
point. Which is a new moon.
Yeah. So that's when we make the Berchat HaChodesh. We basically bless the new month and bless the moon coming in.
Yes.
That's how I realized it. When we had that eclipse the other day, I knew that the next day or the one after would be the start of the new month, and it worked.
It's pretty good. It's on schedule.
Right.
Okay, this month will be for you the head of the month. The first of the months of the year, it will be for you.
And Rashi explains, and Phil, since it's you and Marilyn today, you're going to get a lot of reading. Text 1b.
Regarding the month of Nisan, God said it will be the first in the order of months. Iyar will be called second, Sivan will be the third.
So this text we're not talking about the beginning of the year, because we know the year starts on Rosh Hashanah, right? Which literally means the beginning of the year, the head of the year, which is the month of Tishrei, which is the first month, it's the first day of the month of Tishrei. This talks about we're talking about a new thing. It's a cycle of months. This is and going forward, that Tishrei is the beginning of the year. Sorry, but it's not the first month. Nisan is going to be the first month. So what does this mean, right? What does it mean that how could it be that the first month is the middle of the year, right? Nisan's basically the middle of the year. So how does that work? Where Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the year,
It's the first
and Nisan is the first day the first day of the first of the months. How does that work? Yes, it
Okay.
does talk about that though. You see, we're
Regarding the month of Nisan, God said, it will be the first in the order of months. Ayar will
I
be
think
called the
Phil just read
second.
that one.
Oh,
We're on text too. Yeah.
oh, that's
There's an
right.
echo in here.
Sorry, Phil.
I'll forgive
Actually,
you.
the year belongs only to the sun, as the sun gives birth to the 4 seasons of the year: cold, fall; heat, spring; summer, and winter. Now let us assume that now let's assume the sun to be at the beginning of the Aries. It will travel in a sphere for 365 days, plus close to a quarter of a day, until it returns a second time to where it started out. This is why the year is called Shana, repeat.
Oh,
Now the moon has no year, just as the sun has no month. The sun never experiences renewal, only the moon's light is renewed. It is because of this a month is called a chodesh, new.
Chadash, new.
Chadash.
Chodesh
Yeah.
comes from the
Oh,
word of Chadash.
oh.
Right, so the Ibn Ezra, who we just read, is pointing out that years and months are two totally separate things. The year is split up into four different seasons, right? You have summer, winter, fall, and spring. So what is the new year? It's basically the end of the summer, and we're starting fall. We're starting off the seasons again. Right, that's generally when Rosh Hashanah falls out, except in California, where it's normally the hottest time of the year. But we just don't know our seasons over here. But in the rest of the world, Rosh Hashanah generally is the beginning of fall, right?
Oh, for Jews. Oh,
Well, Rosh
okay,
Hashanah falls
yeah,
out generally right around the beginning of fall.
yeah, but
That's
it's the beginning of the year for
but it's
Jews.
I'm saying it's the beginning of
The
every year, and
beginning
that's
of
the
year
beginning of the year cycle of the season. That's what the beginning of the year is, right? Because the year has nothing to do with the months. Technically, the year is 4 seasons, and months are their own cycle that have nothing to do with the year, right? They're two separate things. The year is
it's
4
the
seasons,
sun,
and the months
sun.
are go by the cycle of the moon, and it's two separate things, and that's why you could have a beginning of a year, a Rosh Hashanah, and then a beginning of the months, which is later, because they technically have nothing to do with each other.
I wonder why the Gregorian calendar has January as the first month of the year.
So beginning of winter. Well,
No, the
technically, it has
beginning
to
of
do
winter
with.
is September 21st.
Well, it's because they believe in other things. Where it's just because they say that he was. What happened on the first day? He was born on the 25th. Something happened on the first. I'm not sure why
So it
exactly.
has to do with the Christian calendar, the Gregorian, the Christian religion?
I'd assume so. I'm not 100% sure. But,
the Gregorian was before the Christian calendar, I think.
it was. They had the 12 months starting from January before that.
Wait. No. Okay, I stand corrected.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's why we need like Matt Chevy would know these kind of things. Explain the whole thing. All right. So now we have to go into Pesach mode. We have 4 questions on this. Number 1 is why. Why do we have why? They could be separated. We could have 2 separate systems of a year and a month cycle. But why do we need that? Why can't we just have one? We have one beginning of a year, which is the beginning of the month, so we'll just make life simpler.
Because the moon has cycles, 12 cycles.
Yeah, but why can't we have a Rosh Hashanah and the beginning of, why can't we have both of them on the same day? Technically, it could. We could have worked it out, but on the same day, because Nisan has nothing special about where the moon cycle is relative to the first day of Tishrei. Technically, the moon's in the same spot. So why can't it have just been on the same day? And 2, why does the Torah choose Nisan? Why does Nisan suddenly become the first of the months? 3, why do months even need to have an annual cycle in general, right? Years follow seasons, so that's why they have a cycle. The months technically don't need to have a cycle that way. Every month is its own cycle. So what does it need to have?
A lunar cycle.
Yeah, every month has a lunar cycle where the moon starts from nothing and goes all to full and then back to nothing. So what's the point of even having a 12-month year that way? It's just like technically there's nothing special to each of those months that it has to be split that way, right? It could just be an independent thing, right? It doesn't have to be connected with a 12-month a month of a year.
If you're a farmer, it helps to know.
You're a farmer, okay.
Yeah,
But
because you got the crops.
yeah, but they're saying there's no like restart, right, of the month. It's the same exact cycle every month. As I'm saying, the
Oh,
year has different things that happen, right? For
yeah,
a few
I see.
months we have spring, for a few months you have summer, then a few months you have winter, a few months you have fall. So technically, you could have said it's 3 months of this. That would be like we have three cycles, and that's like it could be split the same way. It doesn't need to have a separate system.
Okay.
Am I making somewhat sense?
I guess it doesn't have to.
Because there's no restart. There's no change, right? The year has change in it. These months don't have change.
So no.
It goes, and the moon does go up and down, but then the next month just it's the exact same thing. Versus during the year, things do change, right?
Yeah, the stars change. That would
Yeah,
be
and
part
then
of
the
year.
seasons. I'm saying the seasons change.
Yeah.
You're like you feel change. Beginning and end of every month, you don't feel a different change than there was the month before the beginning and end of that month. It's the same thing, basically. And the last thing is, what practical lesson do we learn from this? What's the practical lesson? We always know that Torah has a lesson that teaches us from everything. So, what's the practical lesson we learn from this two-cycle system that we have? All right. So, 4 questions. We expect you to memorize these and recite them by the Seder. Shana hazeh mikol hachadashim. Make something up over there. Okay. So, why do we even have a calendar in town? So calendars are a great invention because they help us keep track of our days and our years. Right? It's great to have a calendar. But in Judaism, we have an additional special purpose. So once we realize what the second special purpose is, we'll understand why a cycle of months is necessary and why Nisan was chosen. As the Ramban, Moshe, the Nachmanides, says in text 3, Phil?
Let's see, is that question 1?
No, Phil.
Three.
Text 3.
Oh, text 3. Oh, okay, there it is. The answer to this question is that when the Torah says regarding Nisan, this month is for you, the head of months, the first of the months of the year, it is to you. It does not mean to say that Nisan is a categorical first, but that is a relative first, namely first for us. That is to say, it is the first month since our Exodus, and the Torah instructs us to begin our count of months from the month of our Exodus. It is the Torah's custom to link the counting of days and months to mitzvot. For example, Jews do not have names for the days of the week. Other nations have names for each day. Jews, however, don't have names for the days of the week. Instead, refer to them in the framework of Shabbat. We say the first day of the Shabbat, the second day of the Shabbat. That is so we will remember Shabbat every day. Similarly, the months never had names in the Torah or among Jews. Rather, Jews would refer to the months as the Torah does. In the first month, and it was on the second year, in the second month, that the cloud lifted, in the seventh month on the first day, and so forth. Thus, then it is meaning of it is a first to you. It does not mean that it is the beginning of the year. It means that it is a first to us, namely that we should call it the first month since our Exodus.
So the Ramban, Nachmanides explains, so what's the point of the calendar? That it reminds us of it gives us like the sense of wonderment that we have. So like in a week, still today in Hebrew, you say Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, day 1, day 2, day 3, and it leads us always up to Shabbat. The whole week we're looking forward to Shabbat. So you can never forget what Shabbat is because today was Yom Revi'i. Today was Wednesday. That means that in 3 days is going to be Shabbat. When you use a different language, then it doesn't have that same thing because there's not always that lead up. So the same thing with the months of the year, where originally we said what we're about to read soon that what it says in the beginning of the Torah, B'chodesh HaRishon, in the beginning, like in the Bereshit, when it says that in the first month in that book, it's talking about the creation of the world. Right? And then it only changes after the Exodus where it says B'chodesh HaRishon, the first month becomes Nisan. Why? To remind us of that we're always counting and remembering the whole year. We're remembering about the miracles that God took us out of Egypt. right? So if this month is the first month, and then ER the next month the second month, and so on and so forth, it's the first month, the second month of something, from something. What's it from? It's from the month of Nisan, where God took us out of Egypt. So we always have this constant remembrance that the whole point of this, all these months, we're counting back up to, again, remember, counting back up to the month again where God took us out of Egypt, and always thinking back that we're in the fourth month from when God took us out of Egypt 3,000 years ago, right?
Um,
And yeah.
I'm sorry, I just have a question because I remember years ago I was told that the Jews count toward the Shabbos. In other words, today is the fifth day to Shabbos, then the fourth day to Shabbos, and so forth.
The
Is
countdown.
Yeah, so so we would be looking forward to Shabbos that way. Now, obviously, I
Like,
didn't
go from seven,
count on
six,
that.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, is that something you've heard of, or am I just remembering wrong?
Um, well, I've never heard of that. It could be, but the way that it's always referred to in the Torah is Yom Rishon Sheni. Like, it's in when the world when in the Bereshit, when the world's created, it says Yom Rishon, right? On the first day, God created this Yom Sheni. So that's where we get it from originally. So
So it's
I have
from,
not
and
heard that, but it could be. It's another idea.
he's saying
That
it's to, and you're
Yeah.
saying it's
Well,
from.
we're counting up to. That's, I guess, it's the same idea, just one is counting down and one is counting up
Mhm.
to. It's just the
Okay,
question is which way it's supposed to be. I'm not sure. It could definitely be an idea, as again, Judaism has a lot of different sides to it.
I've noticed.
Again, it's probably one of these books behind me, but I personally have not heard of that.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And the reason why nowadays we have names to the months, right? We just ended the month of Adar. Instead of saying that would be the month of Shnei Esrei, the 12th month, or it would be Shlosh Esrei technically, it's the 13th month because we had a leap year this year. Instead of saying it's the 13th month or the 12th month, and Nisan saying Nisan is the first month, nowadays we refer to them with names. We have Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevet, Shvat, Adar, Nisan, um, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul. Those names came from when the Jews got out of the Babylonian exile. They left right after the story of Purim, where we went back and rebuilt the temple. They brought those names out with them. And the point of them again was that it's the same, it's similar idea that when we say those names, those Jews then were like, why are we referring to these names with the names of these Persian names that we took out? Because God redeemed us from Egypt. God from Egypt, He did that too. But God redeemed us from Babylon, from Bavel, and that's why we're referring to them as Persian names. It brought us back to that same remembrance of the miracles of Purim, and then the rebuilding of the Second Temple with those names. That's why we currently have names to our months, so we don't refer to them in the same way. Just
Well, I didn't know those were Persian.
yeah, apparently,
Do we know what they mean?
some of them we have them as acronyms. I'm not sure if we know that. We probably do. I don't personally know.
I'll ask Ashi.
Yeah, it might be like ancient Persian, where it might not be the same meaning anymore. Okay. All right, so that's why we have months, and that's why we start with Nisan, the month of miracles, as our first month. That we're always counting back these miracles. So, and this succeeded great, and this tactic actually succeeded great, as we see from this that every Jew keeps thinking about the Exodus, because we're counting back to Nisan, where we always hear that it's the first month. Even nowadays, we might not count it. In your mind, it's the first month, which gets you thinking it. And we always remembered about the Exodus from Egypt, and then going into Israel from that. So in March of 1946, David Ben Gurion referenced this point in his speech that highlighted the enormity of this achievement that we have. That's in text 4.
About 300 years ago, a ship set sail for the New World, and its name was the Mayflower. Was an important event in the history of both England and America. And for this reason, to this day, every American child knows the Mayflower, the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, and Thanksgiving Day. I am, however, very interested to know if any Englishman, or American for that matter, is aware of the hour and the day that the Mayflower set sail. Does any child or even adult know how many pilgrims there were on this historical voyage? What were the names of their families? What did they wear? What did they eat? What did they get? Where did they get water to drink? What path did they navigate? And what happened en route? Behold, it was more than 3,300 years ago that our people left Egypt. Every Jew in the world, in America, Soviet Russia, Yemen, and Germany, knows that his ancestors departed precisely on the 15th of the month of Nisan. What did they wear? Their loins were girded, their sandals were on their feet, and their staffs were in their hands. They ate matzot and arrived at the Red Sea after a 7-day journey. They know the names of their ancestors and they can quote them to you from the 5 books of Moses. To this day, Jews the world over eat the same matzot for 7 days, starting from the 15th of Nisan each year. And they relate the story of the Exodus. And they end by shouting 2 phrases that children and parents and grandparents have been saying for thousands of years. Now we are slaves. Next year we will be free men. Now we are in exile. Next year we will be in Jerusalem, in the land of Israel. This is the nature of the Jews.
Right. And actually, it's all from the Torah, right? It says we left at night, and we know that our entire history of how we got into Israel, right? It's all documented. And right, and this highlights this importance of having this the first month and knowing from the whole Torah, this whole perspective that constantly reminding ourselves that God took us out of Egypt and brought us into Israel, and then I guess then Israel's our land, right? That we got it back then. Right, this is a great answer, but it leaves a little bit to be wanted in the answer because as great as an answer it is, it sounds like we're pushing our perspective, our amazing miracles our remembrance from this into the fact that God that we have a calendar. Right, we're pushing our history into the calendar, not that the calendar was made for it. Feels like there was like was like an artificial cycle to help us remember this part of history, right? It was we created this to remember this, but Torah is precise in general, right? So if the Torah created this way of counting the months, there has to be an additional reason, not just for us to remember, not just that we remember the Pesach for that. There has to be an additional reason why this cycle is so important. So we're gonna dig a little deeper, and so to understand why the months have this annual cycle. So first, we'll understand why we have the 2 tracks. What's the symbolism between each track? The track of the year and the track of the months. So understand this. We'll see we can understand this more by seeing which month each of the 2 tracks start with. One starts with Tishrei and one starts with Nisan. Right, the year starts with Tishrei, the first month of the year, and the cycle of the month starts with Nisan. So why is that? That's in text number 5. Phil?
The Midrash states, when God chose a world, he designated dates for new months and new years. This track is indicative of the natural law that governed the universe at its inception. Accordingly, the month of Tishrei, when natural law was created, was designated as the beginning of the year, and all subsequent months followed from Tishrei. However, God saw that the world could not sustain this level of judgment, and it arose in his will to choose Jacob and his descendants, meaning righteous people in their good deeds. In his great wisdom, he chose to reward them in a manner that overrules the judgment of the natural order. He then flooded the world with kindness and implemented a miraculous superior order. He then designated a new month for the commencement of this order, and the annual cycle of months followed from this month. He chose Nisan because in this month, God's great hand was displayed to the Jewish people. Great divine miracles occurred and are remembered in this month. It thus represents a wiser and miraculous and far superior order.
Right, so that's the symbolism of the 2 calendars. One is that the annual calendar is nature, right? That the world began in Tishrei, it was created in Tishrei, and it goes through the whole year. And then we have the supernatural. When the supernatural started, when God kind of changed, like did something out of the ordinary, which is Nisan, where we had all these great miracles. We had the splitting of the sea, right? That's Nisan, the month of miracles, the month of the supernatural, right? So Tishrei is the month of the beginning of the natural period, and Nisan is the month of the starting of the supernatural. So, and they're not, and these two cycles represent these two systems, not only because they begin in Tishrei and Nisan, but also because the very nature of the lunar and solar cycles is kind of represented in the natural and the supernatural, which explains more. The Rebbe explains more in text number 6.
The natural order is a steady system that never ceases or changes. It is therefore analogous to the light and the cycle of the sun that is never changing. Similarly, the word shana, year in Hebrew, is from the cognate mishneh, repetition, the same cycle repeating in an endless loop. The miraculous order is different in that it is a novel order. From time to time, God temporarily suspends the natural order to perform a miracle. This is analogous to the moon because it fluctuates each day and its light is renewed each month. According to Chodesh, month in Hebrew, is from the cognate Chiddush, novelty.
It's the same letters in Hebrew, right? Chodesh and Chidush. Basically, you could, as if you change up the vowels,
Novelty.
it's the same. It's the same
month.
letters.
Chodesh and Chiddush.
Chidush, yeah, novelty.
Chidush.
So right, so time itself, not just the months, not just the months that in which the two cycles begin, is the natural, talks of the natural and the supernatural orders. Right? There's two ways to mark time. First, you can mark time of nature, and you can also mark time of miracles. In the annual and the regular nature period, we're celebrating every day of God's nature, right? God made this great world, and we're marking off each day. In the monthly cycle, which is of the supernatural order, we're marking off God's miracles, right? We're marking off the times that God did all these great miracles. So time, though, is a natural phenomenon, right? Time technically is the natural or every day. So it would seem surprising that you could put time into the supernatural. Seemingly, supernatural should be higher than the time period, right? It shouldn't have anything to do with time. If time is nature, then we're talking about the supernatural, then time should have nothing to do. Yes, time should have nothing to do with it. So if you think about it more, though, you could realize how time and the supernatural and the wondrous things could be connected. It talks about a little bit more in text number 7. Bill?
The first time something unnatural occurs, it is called a miracle. If it is repeated again, it too becomes natural.
Right, if we think about it, what's the most amazing thing that happens every day? You have the sun that goes up and the moon that goes down. You have everything in nature that works perfectly. Everything should technically be a miracle, that our bodies function right and single thing works perfectly, works great. And if it doesn't, God forbid, something goes wrong, right? With that generally, thank God most people are working fine, everyone should be fine, is a miracle in and of itself. But we don't think about it that way, because when something's just happening, that just becomes nature. So even with, like, let's say the splitting of the sea was a great miracle. Let's say the splitting of the sea happened every single day. Then at some point it would just be the nature. Every day at 12 o'clock, the Red Sea splits, right? and also in the desert, right? They got bread, they got manna from the sky every day. I'm sure at some point it was for 40 years. I'm sure at some point that was just their nature to it. So the same thing with us. The first day, if let's say bread fall from the sky, it would be a miracle for us. Day 2 still. By day 7, it might just be like, okay, so from now on, I don't know how to go to the grocery store anymore. And the new nature is that we get it, right? So the line between nature and the supernatural is a slim line, right? It depends on how many times it happens, right? So you can still have that connection.
Slim line most of the time. We think of it as very different, very separate.
But they're not so far apart.
Interesting. Yeah. It's just a matter of repetition. Constant repetition.
Yeah. So the reason why God, though, has these two ways of nature and the supernatural is because each one gives a different benefit. It gives a different benefit into the world. When God does the regular day, right? It makes God says God creates the world every single second, right? So when God's making the world happen the natural way, I guess supposed natural way, every single second, which is like that, it's unchanging and it's always dependable. That in itself demonstrates a divine thing, that because only God is endless and it can make this keep happening in the same way every single day, right? So that's how God nature is revealed to as God's work, right? Because it's just this repetition must be God's work, because it's just working too well for it to have been by man. But when God chooses to do the things in the world in a supernatural way, then he kind of awes the world into like believing into God, right? When you see this great miracle, one says when everyone saw the sea split, they knew that is God is protecting the Jews, and no one attacked the Jews for months until Amalek came, right? Because then we suddenly realized that there's definitely a God in the world. Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, heard about the great miracles. He came and joined the Jewish people because you had this amazing miracle, and he awed everyone, I guess, into submission, right? He made God awed everyone into submitting themselves. Um, right? Because you can't even deny God's existence anymore because of this great miracle that happened. There's no other explanation. It must be God. So this is why God gives us interaction in the world in both ways: the natural order, which that generally binds nature to Him, and the supernatural, which overrules nature and just makes us submit to God's will just by basically pushing in our faces that God is there. Yeah, it gives us that wake up call, and there's no choice but to admit that there's a God. So the calendar celebrates both of these tracks because time itself we have both. The cycle of the year tells us that nature is made by God, and the cycle of the months is that God could overrule nature by will, right? If God wants to overrule nature, He could do it at any time. That's why we have these two cycles. So now we understand why we have these two different tracks in the calendar. Well, that's the beginning of the explanation.
Oh.
I think the class goes on for a little bit more. All right, we got a few more pages left. All right, that's why we have two different tracks in the calendar. All right, since both give us a different dimension of God's interacting with the world, they both come from the same place. They look different on the surface, right? Very different. Nature and the supernatural look extremely different on the surface. In fact, it's so different that the Ibn Ezra in the beginning, the first thing that we read says that the sun has no months, right? It doesn't depend on the months, and the moon has no year because they're independent of each other. When we look deeper in it, and we discover the divine symbolism in both of them, we have a link. Huh?
But actually, they are, the moon does change according to the sun, because the sun, the
moon reflects off the sun.
Yeah, and if the sun is changing, the moon does change.
But the sun doesn't change throughout the year. Are you saying?
No,
like
but the way we see the moon changes.
Yes, but again, that doesn't have to do with the yearly cycle necessarily as much as the monthly cycle, right?
But we just had an eclipse, and that was due to the sun and the earth.
Well, that was due to the moon blocking the sun.
Yeah.
You said the moon.
Well, the sun, the moon moves. The sun supposedly doesn't move. The earth moves, and the moon moves, and the earth moves.
But again, in the way that I guess the month works in general, the moon and the sun don't have that same interaction in that way, where it's not affected by nature, right? If it's winter or if it's summer, the moon's still going to go up and down. Maybe it'll get a little bigger and a little smaller, but that's kind of, I guess, our perspective of it, where we are. But
it's affected by the sun.
But the moon's still going up and still going down in the same cycle every single month, regardless. Right? You definitely see it with the sun that with the year the changes way more.
The sun is higher in the sky in the summer, the winter is lower in the sky.
Yeah. So that's why the sun is definitely affected. The sun is 100% affects the world more. Right? That's what we're saying, that the sun affects the world in a more physical way that we can tell always. the moon not necessarily as it's not affected by that same yearly cycle,
No,
right? That's where we're going on the whole.
it does affect the earth.
It affects the Earth. It's not
Well,
saying that the moon
because
doesn't affect the Earth. It's saying that it's not doesn't affect the Earth in yearly cycles. It's got nothing to do with the year. It's
No.
got more to do with the month, generally,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Otherwise, this class would just, take a lot longer to convince you.
I was just saying.
Right. So when we look deeper into both of these systems, we realize the divine connection between the divineness in both of them. And digging deeper generally is what we do always in Judaism and in faith and in definitely Hasidic thought and in generally the whole Talmud is digging deeper into the Torah and trying to get to the base of the idea. So it's not surprising that Judaism would merge both of these ideas together um, in order to create them, right? If we go into deeper and understand why this is, right, then we understand why not, because there's both of these things in both perspectives of God. When we dig in, we see that it's just basically two ways that God makes the world go. That's why they're connected together, right? So it's not supposed to be a messy and confusing system. It's supposed to show the inherent unity of the whole system. And this is the reason why this is the reason why the calendar itself exist, and it's not just an artificial add-on, right? Because the point of the calendar existing wasn't just for us to count from Nisan and to remember the miracles that God made, is to remind us of that God could make miracles, not to do with the fact of the miracle that happened. That fact helps us remember that God has this ability to change nature itself. All right, so now we answered three of our questions. Three of the four questions took a little bit longer than Magid by the Seder. I'm sure everyone's anxious to get to the chicken soup, but we have the wine though, and that's the main point. So the first question, right? We asked why the first month is not the beginning of the year and why Nisan was chosen instead. So the reason we said is because we're counting back to the Exodus to remind us of all these miracles that God made. That's why we chose the month of Nisan to begin the miracles of the month, the counting by the months. Right, and the whole point of the months is the supernatural, and Nisan is the month of the supernatural. And we asked why the cycle of the months required a beginning and end in the first place, and the answer is that even though it looks like it might be two totally different cycles, right, the solar and the lunar, the reason why it has a cycle is because they are inherently connected at the end of the day. Everything is connected, right? Everything does come back to nature, to God's will, and God does run both of them at the end of the day, and they're both of these types of nature, the nature and the supernatural, are interconnected. That's why both of them have a cycle, right? And it's one single continuum that keeps going. We are left though with our fourth question, right? Our fourth and last question. So, what's the practical thing that we get out of this, right? We know that it says Torah, Melashon Hora. Torah is from the wording of Hora, of a lesson that we learn, right? So everything in Torah, there's a lesson to learn. So, what's the lesson that we learn from the different types of the months and the supernatural and the natural? So
we shouldn't take anything for granted.
That's definitely always a good thing.
God can change things.
That's definitely one. That's definitely a good lesson to take out of it. And there's an additional lesson now that we're also going to learn also. But it's always good to have more than one lesson to learn out of something.
Where are we?
We're going to be on page 216. So it's axiom. It's a basic thing in Judaism that whenever God does something, it must help us. Whenever God created something, it's to help us serve God, right? That's why God created everything in the world, is to help us serve God and to help us use it to serve God, to use something in order to serve God, as it explains in text number 8. That's what we talked about last week, right?
We talk about it all the time.
And time before that, and we have kind of one goal, that's the
in the beginning of God's creation. This verse calls for a midrashic interpretation. As our rabbi stated, God created the world for the sake of the Torah, which is called the beginning of his way. and for the sake of Yisrael, who are called the first of his grain.
Right, so the Torah says Bereshit in the beginning. In Hebrew, the letter bet means in general. When you have the letter bet before a word, it means in.
Or at.
And it also is number 2, right? Because Aleph is 1, bet is 2, right? So this gives the 2 different translations of Bereshit. Their literal translation is in the beginning. The midrashic, like the more deep, I guess, explanation, interpretation is that the world is created for 2 entities that are labeled beginning and first, the Torah and the Jewish people, right? So there's 2 things that were created at that time, right? So this means that everything that was created, all of creation was created for us to be able to serve God in a better place. The whole purpose of everything, purpose of food, the purpose of our houses, the purpose of a bed is in order to be able to use these things to serve God in a better way. Yeah.
What? I was just going to say this is another reason for them to hate us because because the world was created for the Jewish
They
people,
will say
the Torah, and for us.
they will if you ask anyone from any other religion, they will have a similar opinion. So it's not necessarily unique to Judaism.
Oh, okay.
I would think. I guess if you look at the
You've
Islamic
read
world,
the
their whole
Quran?
no, but I think ours is a lot more peaceful, in my opinion. Right. So if this is true of,
I mean, they really hate that we're the chosen people. I don't know who ever would tell anyone that. You know.
okay, some people could argue with the truth, but that's their own problem. Doesn't mean that someone's lesser than anyone else. It just means that everyone has their own mission in this world. That's what it is.
They don't know that.
Okay, so that's
they think that we're so great. Here we go.
Well, I think we're pretty great too.
What we've given.
Yeah. But it's not like we have it easier in the world for that.
No,
even from the Torah's perspective, we have 613 mitzvot. Everyone else has 7, right? God didn't make it easy on us for choosing us as the chosen nation. Right. So going back to creation. So what's the main? What's one of the big things that was time. So this concept of time must exist also where we like, and I guess the annual cycles for us to be able to serve God. Right. There must be this connection here. So what is it? So the answer is found in these 2 different perspectives of time of the cycle of the annual yearly cycle that we have. Right, the natural order and the more supernatural order. As the Rebbe explains in text number 9. I think we're back to you, Phil.
As Jews, we must serve God not because we understand his importance and want to serve him, but out of a sense of obedience and self-sacrifice to submit to his will. The benefit of this method is that our service transcends the finite measures and boundaries of our nature. This method of serving God stimulates a parallel desire in God to conduct the world's affairs in a transcendental, supernatural order that awes the world's natural order into submission, as we explained above. On the other hand, we must not neglect our human tendencies when serving God, as our entire heart and soul must be wrapped up with it. This is why we must study the Torah and fulfill the mitzvot not only out of obedience, but also because we understand and love it. This method of serving God stimulates a parallel desire in God to conduct the world's affairs according to the natural order, which binds the world's natural order to God.
Right, so these 2 different tracks of our divine engagement that we have with God parallel the 2 different ways which the world works parallels the 2 ways that we could serve God. One is that we serve God just out of and of course these are both of these ways are also interconnected. One way is that we subjugate us to God, that God says something, we do it because that's God's will, and we're in awe of God. The other way is out of love. Since we love God, we do it. So that's the 2 parallels in nature. So when we do something out of love for God, that's just our nature, right? Our nature, the nature of things. We love God, so we're just going to go do it, right? That parallels nature. The supernatural is when we don't want to do necessarily what God wants at that moment, and we overcome that. right? And we go do it anyway. That's the supernatural. We submit ourselves to God, going against what our will is at the moment. That's the supernatural, where we go out of our tendencies in order to serve God. And going back to what the Ramban said at the beginning, though, the reason why God created the months by that way, starting in Nisan, was to remind us of the Exodus always. You can see this in their calendar now, also in the same way, where you have when you look at the calendar and you see that it's the month when you look at the calendar and you see the way that the months are set up, we're reminded of both of these ways of serving God. Every time you look at a Jewish calendar, you have this now that you know this, that will come to your mind, that what's the point of the months? In order for us to serve God in a natural way, in a supernatural way, right? That's the whole point of the months. That's a good thing to keep in mind always with this. When you look at a calendar, that's what we give you a calendar, right? Remind you to serve God in the right way.
It's my main calendar, but once in a while I stumble because I had to find out when Memorial Day was, and I
It's on the
panicked 'cause I
calendar?
couldn't find. I don't think so.
No, we have different holidays in the calendar.
Yeah.
Anyway. Right. So when we serve God out of love, we strengthen more of the natural order, and we serve God out of submission, we strengthen the supernatural.
We strengthen the
We strengthen the supernatural or the world, which is us going beyond our nature, beyond our wants at the moment, and submitting ourselves to God, which is supernatural. Right. So that's the two ways that we serve God. Well, your nature is to do what you wanted at the moment.
Yeah,
supernatural is going above nature. Animals never do the supernatural. They only do their nature. Right? But we're actually about to learn that it is your nature. You just don't know it. That's what we're getting to, and we're getting to in a minute. Right. So in each way of doing these, in each way of serving God it benefits us and is advantageous to us. These two ways of serving God. This explains in text number 10.
When we serve God out of submission rather than out of understanding and love, our minds and hearts might object. We overrule these objections through the power of our submission and force ourselves to serve God. However, when we serve God out of complete understanding or love, the mind and the heart preclude any possibility of defying God's will. There is no selfishness in us. We are utterly transformed. Although such transformation completely eradicates our selfish tendencies, there is still a benefit to serving God with submission. It gives us the opportunity to toil for God, to wrestle with our inner objections and subdue our selfish tendencies. In other words, inner transformation highlights our ability to bind with God by making the body transparent to the soul. To the extent that we eradicate all selfishness, serving God with submission highlights our subservience to God. Though our minds and hearts might be selfishly inclined, we compel ourselves to go against our natural inclinations and fulfill God's will.
So what gives us the strength to be able to overcome our nature and do God's will? We'll call it spiritual adrenaline. Right? The same way you ever hear all the stories where, God forbid, a kid is trapped under a car or something, and the mom comes or the parent comes and just lifts up the car, pulls the kid out, but you can never replicate that again, right? They never have that. They don't have that strength in general. What is it? It's got that adrenaline where it gave you that strength in order to rise to the moment. It gives you that adrenaline. You're able to do it.
Maybe that's the soul that was put in us in order to direct us that way, because there's like the animal soul, and there's what's the other soul?
Godly soul.
Godly soul. So maybe it's the godly soul that we tap into at that time. And why do we do it? Maybe the soul has some influence on us.
It could be.
Or remember the goodness. Remember, we're thankful. Remember all the good things, and we do it for that reason.
That could be. Yeah, that could be the spiritual nature of the physical adrenaline.
Yeah.
But what is spiritual adrenaline? How do we get the spiritual adrenaline to overcome our nature when we want to do something that's not God's will? So throughout the generations, whenever Jews were told that they have to go and basically go against God and renounce God and go to another religion by force, the Jews basically said no, right? And God, unfortunately, they were killed, right, by the thousands, by the millions for this, right? In the days of the Kazakhs, and it's in the 1680s, 90s time, right? If the Jews there were hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed at that time. If they had converted, nothing would have happened to them. Same thing with the Crusades. Right? And the Jews said no, right? We're not converting, right? We're staying strong to God. They got that adrenaline, right? We got that spiritual adrenaline, I guess. We're like, this is God's will. I'm not gonna disconnect myself from God in order to save my life, because then I'm disconnecting myself from my soul, from my purpose. So and that gives us that spiritual adrenaline in that moment. But if we realize that every time we give into our base nature and do something that's not necessarily in God's will at the moment, every time that we may be tempted to eat something that God doesn't want us to eat, or to not keep Shabbat in the way that God wants us to do it, or I guess to not that we may have missed, prayers that morning or something, and we're just like, okay, I missed it, and then we realize that also, not in the same way, but also somewhat disconnects us from God, which gives us that same spiritual adrenaline to do it in the way that we want, to do it the way that God wants, right? That should give us that spiritual boost to do it in the correct way. Right? Where it's not necessarily.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's your spiritual adrenaline that tells you, I gotta overcome that, and I gotta do it now. That explains a little more in text 11, I think.
It is very easy for us to resist and subjugate our nature when we reflect deeply that to conquer our nature in all this and more, and in fact to do the very opposite, is a much lighter form of suffering than death. May God preserve us. Yet we would lovingly and willingly have accepted the pain of death. God preserve us, so as not to be separated from God's unity and oneness, even for a moment, by an act of idolatry, God forbid. Certainly, then, we ought to accept lovingly and willingly the comparatively minor pain of exerting ourselves in the performance of the mitzvot in order to bind ourselves to God with an eternal bond.
Right. So when we have this adrenaline rush, technically anything's possible. You could pick up a car, you could go against your nature, and God forbid, say that I'm going to die for God. Right? God, I'm not renouncing God for anything. And then in the more minor things, right, we're going to say I'm gonna go do the right thing today because because God wants me to do it. But adrenaline could only last so long, right? It's a feeling that fades away at some point. And how many times can this keep happening, right? If we live, how many times can you keep going against your nature? If someone someone lives in a Jewish community, which makes everything easy, right? Everyone around you is serving God, and everyone around you is doing the same thing, go to shul, going to the same restaurants and everything, then that's an easy life, right? Everyone's serving God with this love, and it's just easy life. But once we move out of that, where not everyone we're interacting with on a daily basis has that same mindset, not everyone's just loving God and doing what God wants on a daily basis, it gets harder. And that's when our spiritual adrenaline, that's when we submit ourselves to God more. But technically, how long could this last, right? How long could this last that we keep doing this, right? At some point, it's not going to happen anymore. So what do we learn from these two calendar cycles? That it wasn't just an artificial cycle, right? The monthly cycle. It wasn't just artificially made in order for us to remember the month of Nisan and remember the month that God took us out of Egypt. It's part of the annual cycle. It's the other side of the coin of the yearly cycle. We have the yearly cycle that starts in Tishrei, and the other side of the coin that was created, I guess, at the same time that we have, is the monthly cycle from the month of Nisan. So the same thing with us. That it's not when we're overcoming our desire to do something that God doesn't want. It's not that we're overcoming our nature. It's that we're showing our true nature in ourselves, that we actually really want to do what God wants, right? What is that spiritual adrenaline showing? It's showing your true nature, what you really want to do. Maybe you don't know it at that moment, but that spiritual adrenaline is telling you, no, you really do want to do it. And what are you submitting yourself to? You're submitting yourself to your true nature in itself. You're not submitting yourself to something formed. It's actually part of you, and it's actually what you actually want to do. The Rabbi explains in text number 12 a little further.
How can we find the strength to wrestle with our selfish inclinations and overcome them if they are still strong and have remained strong even after we've subdued them? Knowing that our efforts to conquer our nature will eventually lead us to transform our nature enables us to maintain the struggle.
Right, and actually, we have the concept of this in Jewish law, where it says, where God forbid a man does not want to divorce his wife, and in Jewish law, it cannot be coerced. Right, the man has to actually want to do it. And actually, so it says you force him until he says he wants to. You hit him until he says he wants to. So in Israel today, what they do actually is they basically make the guy's life miserable. They don't do any physical violence, but they'll shut down their bank accounts, make them not be able to leave the country. They lose their jobs.
Really?
Yeah, if a man
They
does not
can
want
shut down. Who
the
can shut down the government?
the rabbinic courts have the power to go to the secular end of it and basically make the man's life a living hell until he wants to give a divorce. But then you have a question then, right? That's not what he wants to do. He's just doing it for these alternative reasons. So it comes back to this again, that the man actually wants to give the divorce, right? He wants to do the right thing and divorce his wife and let her go free and remarry. But he has these external factors that are covering this over. And all we're doing now is helping him realize that this is what he actually wants to do. Right? This is where we have this concept in Jewish law where everyone actually wants to do the right thing at the end of the day. Sometimes, so this is the extreme example where it's actually kind of the only example in modern times where we force someone to do the right thing in that way, because it is such a horrible thing for someone to do, to keep their wife locked in a marriage that they don't want. Because in Jewish law, the man needs to give the divorce, and the woman can't get remarried without it. So that's where they have that concept where they just make their lives miserable. And actually, so in America, what they do instead is, since we don't have that same power and not legally allowed to just beat people up on the street, it's not so recommended. They put them what's called in chayrim. They'll put them in they basically exclude them from the community. Where if that person walks into your shul, you're not allowed to give them an aliyah. You're not allowed to count them as part of the minyan, right? You're basically supposed to exclude them and pretend like they're not even there, right? That's what they do. That's what they do in the U.S. in order to force this person to give the divorce. But I guess going to the better end of it, where in every mitzvah that we do, every time we think we don't want to do a mitzvah and we force ourselves to do the mitzvah, that's showing our true nature. We actually want to do the mitzvah, right? So it's not that this adrenaline is just doing something, forcing something foreign into us. It's just getting us to overcome an unnatural thing of not wanting to do God's will and making us do the natural thing of wanting God's will, wanting to do God's will. That's why we keep repeating this cycle again and again until it actually just becomes our overt nature that we always just want to do God's will, which takes a lot of work, obviously. It's not an easy thing, but eventually we're all able to get there because it's just revealing our nature. And this answers our fourth question: what do we learn from the months? That the natural order from Tishrei and the supernatural order of months from Nisan are both sides of one coin, and we learn from that we always have to use the supernatural part to overcome the unnatural, to show our true nature of wanting to serve God in the correct way and doing what God wants. And that is what we learned from Nisan. And it says Nisan Nigalu, in Nisan we were redeemed. So God willing, through us doing everything that God wants, which we are doing, continue to do, God will bring Mashiach and take us out of this exile. Amen. And we will have the revealed godness in this world. May it happen now.
Amen.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Have a good night.
Have a good night and a good week, everyone.
You too.
And happy Shabbos.